For 10 years, my family called me the disappointment for choosing a paintbrush over a law degree. Last week, I invited them to a small gallery event. They had no idea they were walking into the Whitney Museum, about to see my name carved in stone on its newest contemporary wing. My name is Alara Vance. To my parents, my MFA was a monument to failure, a decade-long rebellion against the future they'd mapped out. Partner at a firm, a corner office, their version of success. But tonight, after a lifetime of being told my dreams were too fragile, I was about to show them what a real monument looks like. The only question was, after all the years of silence and scorn, would they even be able to see it? To understand the magnitude of that night at the Whitney, you have to go back to a dining room in Westchester, New York, in 2009, and the last time my father said he was proud of me. I was 22, holding an acceptance letter to Yale Law School. My father, Robert Vance, a tax attorney who built his practice from a one-room office, framed that letter on his desk. My mother, Claire, called every relative, our daughter the future lawyer. It was the culmination of their entire life's work. I was the investment. My older brother, Julian, had already followed the script: Wharton, finance, a sleek apartment in the city. I was supposed to complete the set. But in that same spring mail, buried beneath the law school brochures, was another letter. Acceptance to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago's MFA program. Full ride. I didn't tell them. I tucked it under my mattress like a secret, a guilty, thrilling secret. For 3 weeks, I carried both futures inside me. One was a polished corridor with a known destination. The other was a dark, beautiful forest with no path. The crack appeared over salmon and asparagus at that fateful dinner. Julian was talking mergers. My dad was beaming. Then he turned to me. "So, Alara, we'll need to get you a proper suit for orientation. None of that college sweatshirt nonsense." I put my fork down. My voice was so quiet the room seemed to swallow it. "I've been offered a spot at the Art Institute of Chicago, for painting." The silence was absolute. Julian stopped chewing. My mother's smile didn't fall, it froze, then slowly decomposed. My father wiped his mouth with his napkin, a slow, deliberate motion. "That's a lovely hobby, sweetheart, but we've discussed this. You have a real future ahead of you." "It's not a hobby, it's a full scholarship. It's a real graduate degree." "A degree in what?" Julian chuckled, not unkindly, but with the certainty of someone who knows the price of everything. "In unemployment. Do you know what the average income is for a fine artist?" That was the first time I heard the word. The disappointment. My father didn't shout it. He sighed it later that night, a weary exhale to my mother in the kitchen. I was on the stairs, unseen. After everything, Julian delivers and she becomes a disappointment. The label stuck. It became my name in that house. I went to Chicago. They paid for nothing. The full ride covered tuition, but not rent, not food, not the crushing cost of materials. I waited tables at a diner that smelled of old grease, stretching canvases in the 3 a.m. quiet after my shifts. I learned to mix my own paints to save money. I didn't call home much. When I did, my mother's voice was a careful, distant thing. "Are you eating enough?" "Never. How is your work?" The first real blow came in my second year. I'd been selected for a coveted group show at a small but respected gallery in River North. It was my first real break. I invited them, hopping foolishly. The show was on a Friday. Thursday night, my mother called. "Honey, your father has a pivotal client dinner, and Julian's flying in. We just can't make it to Chicago this time." I stood in my tiny studio, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the 4 paintings I'd killed myself to finish. I could hear a party in the background at their house. They weren't busy. They were home. They'd chosen a casual Friday night with Julian over my first exhibition. 5 people came to that show. My roommate, 2 classmates, the gallery owner, and a critic from the Chicago Reader who ended up giving me a single devastating line. "Vance's work strives for emotional depth but drowns in derivative technique." I sold nothing. I sat on the L train ride home, clutching the cheap plastic cup of wine from the opening, feeling the word etch itself deeper into my bones. Disappointment. I need to pause here for a second. If you've ever had a dream that everyone in your life told you was foolish, if you've ever carried a hope so fragile you were afraid to even breathe on it, put a heart in the comments. Let's see how many of us are in this room. I graduated with my MFA into the teeth of the 2012 recession. The art world had collapsed. Galleries were shuttering. My diner job evaporated. For 8 months, I lived on a friend's couch, working as a night receptionist at a gym, painting in the storage closet during my breaks. My parents' calls became interventions. "It's not too late," my father would say. "I have friends at Fordham Law. We can get your applications in." My mother tried a softer sell. "You could teach art at a nice private school. That's stable." They weren't offers. They were life rafts for a drowning woman, but to grab one meant admitting the ocean had beaten me. I couldn't give them that satisfaction. So I doubled down. I moved to a cockroach-infested walk-up in Bushwick, Brooklyn. I became a studio assistant for a famously cruel established artist, a man who paid me in criticism and occasional scraps of leftover art supplies. For 3 years, I stretched his canvases, mixed his colors, and watched him sell paintings for sums that would have erased my debt for a lifetime. And I painted my own work at night, fueled by a quiet, burning fury. This is where I met Leo. Leo Matsuda ran a tiny nonprofit gallery in Red Hook. He was 65, a former sculptor with clay permanently under his nails. He came to pick up a piece from my boss, saw my work stacked against my corner of the studio dark, intricate explorations of memory and erasure. He didn't say much, just, "Who did these?" When I told him, he nodded. "You're working for the wrong artist." Leo gave me my first solo show. It was in a raw space, pipes exposed, floor uneven. He called it the Unseen Hours. We printed the invites on his old photocopier. I sent one to my parents. It came back in my own mailbox, returned to sender, address unknown, my mother's handwriting. That one hurt differently. It was an active erasure. But that show changed everything. A curator from the new museum came. She bought a piece. A major collector from Chelsea followed. Suddenly, I wasn't a studio assistant, I was an emerging artist. I got a real studio, my first grant. The work got darker, more complex, digging into the archaeology of family silence. I was mining my own pain, and the art world was starting to pay for it. And with every small success, the silence from Westchester grew louder, more deliberate. Julian got married. I wasn't invited. My mother told Aunt Lydia I was traveling for work. A lie. They had a family portrait taken, 3 people in the frame. I found out on Instagram. For a decade, this was the rhythm. My career was a slow, quiet ascent in a world they refused to see. Their lives were a closed loop from which I had been edited out. The disappointment was no longer an active insult. It was a fact, a permanent entry in the family ledger. Then 2 years ago, the Whitney Biennial. My series, Return to Sender, was selected. It was the biggest moment of my professional life. The Biennial is the most important survey of contemporary American art, its legitimacy. It's a door slammed shut on anyone who calls you a hobbyist. I called my parents. My father answered. "Ilara, to what do we owe the honor?" I told him. There was a long pause. "The Whitney, in the city, well, that's something. Not congratulations, something." Like a peculiar weather event, they didn't come. My brother texted me the night before, "Break a leg, kid," from his honeymoon in Bora Bora. But the Biennial did something critical. It put me on the radar of the museum's acquisition committee, and it put me in front of the director, Alicia Chen. She was a legend, fierce, visionary. She saw my work and she saw something else, a coherent, powerful voice exploring a uniquely American silence. We had coffee. She talked about the museum's new expansion, a wing dedicated to living artists redefining contemporary practice. She asked what I would create if scale and budget were not obstacles. What I told her would become a 9,000 square foot installation. And what she offered me, 6 months later, would become the secret I carried for 18 months, the secret that led to that invitation. The small gallery event. But before I tell you what happened when those museum doors opened, I need to tell you about the call. The call that proved, even after everything, a part of me was still that girl on the stairs, hopping to overhear something different. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the Whitney unveiling. My studio phone rang, my mother, her voice was strained, odd. "Ilara, your father, he's had some tests. His heart. It's not he's fine, but he's talking about legacy, about things left unsaid." She took a shaky breath. "We'd like to see you. We'd like to understand your world, maybe visit your studio." My whole body went cold. After a decade of silence, a lifetime of dismissal, they were reaching out. Because of a scare, because of mortality, not because of my work, but because of his heart. The old hope, that stupid, resilient hope, flickered. What if this was the crack? What if this was my chance, finally, to be seen? So I told them. I said I was having a small, private viewing of a new project. Just family, a few close friends, a gallery in the city. I gave them the address, 99 Gansevoort Street, the Whitney's address. They did Google it. Why would they? They'd never visited me. I hired a car to bring them from Westchester. I pictured it, my father in his best suit, my mother clutching her purse, both stepping out onto the cobblestones, looking up at the brutalist facade of the Whitney Museum for the very first time, looking for a small gallery door, seeing instead the grand entrance, the banners, the crowd. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have planned, was who else was in that car. Julian had decided to come, and he had done what my parents never did. He had looked up the address. He knew, in the back of the black town car, gliding down the West Side Highway, my brother Julian looked at the GPS, then at our parents, and said the 5 words that shattered the entire fragile premise of the evening. "This is the Whitney Museum." My mother blinked. The what? "The Whitney Museum of American Art, Mom. It's not a gallery, it's the Whitney." Julian's voice was flat, a lawyer stating facts. He pulled it up on his phone. 99 Gansevoort, that's the main entrance. My father, sitting stiffly in his suit, turned his head slowly. "There must be a mistake," she said. "A small gallery." "There's no mistake." Julian held up his phone, the sleek museum facade glowing on the screen. "She lied to us." The air in the car changed. My father's confusion curdled into something harder, betrayal. My mother just looked lost, her hands fluttering to her necklace. But why would she? Julian, ever the analyst, connected the dots I'd left for him. The Whitney Biennial was 2 years ago. She was in it. We didn't go. This isn't a viewing. This is a statement. He looked out the window as the city lights blurred past. "She's humiliating us." He was wrong, and he was right. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about proof, tangible, institutional, granite glass proof. But from the backseat of that car, the distinction was meaningless. They were arriving at a battlefield, and they hadn't known they were at war. The car pulled up under the museum's soaring canopy. A uniformed attendant opened the door. My parents emerged, not onto a quiet side street, but into the electric buzz of a major New York event. Paparazzi flashes popped at the red carpet 100 feet away. Women in architectural gowns, men in tuxedos, a low roar of conversation and clinking glasses spilled from the open doors. My father froze on the curb, his face pale under the museum lights. A young woman with a headset and a clipboard materialized beside them. "Vance family, right this way. Alara is expecting you." She whisked them past the main queue, through a side door into the stark, polished concrete belly of the museum. They were led to a private elevator. The doors closed. Silence. The elevator opened directly into a vast, raw space. The new wing, still smelling of drywall and fresh paint. And there I was. Not in a waiter's uniform, not in paint-splattered jeans, but in a simple black column dress, my hair in a sleek knot. Standing beside Alicia Chen, the museum director, and a small group of trustees. I saw them take it in. The scale of the space, soaring 50 feet to the ceiling, the security personnel, the importance of the people around me. My father's eyes locked on mine. There was no warmth, no pride, just a cold, furious calculation. I walked over, my heels clicking on the concrete. "You made it." "What is this, Alara?" My father's voice was a low, controlled rumble. "A joke." "No joke, this is my new installation. It's being unveiled tonight. I wanted you to see it first." My mother found her voice, thin and strained. "You said a small gallery, you said family." "You are my family. And this," I gestured to the space, "is my work. I stopped waiting for you to ask to see it." Julian stepped forward, ever the mediator, but his tone was sharp. "You manipulated them. You used Dad's health scare to get them here, to this spectacle." Alicia Chen chose that moment to glide over. She extended a hand. "Robert, Claire, I'm Alicia Chen, director of the museum. We're so honored you could join us for this historic moment. Your daughter is a visionary." My father shook her hand on autopilot, his social programming overriding his shock. "Historic. The naming of the Alicia Chen Contemporary Wing is of course a great honor," she said with a gracious smile. "But tonight is about the inaugural commission that defines its mission. Alara, the silent ledger. It's a transformative gift to the institution." I watched the word hit them, gift, naming. Their eyes darted to the far wall, where a massive, elegant plaque was covered by a velvet drape. My mother's hand went to her mouth. But before they could form a question, Alicia clapped her hands softly. The private viewing, shall we? She led our small group toward the center of the space. Let me describe it to you. The installation was called the Silent Ledger. It filled the entire wing. From the ceiling hung hundreds of translucent, laser-etched panels, each one a blown-up scan of a document from my life. The returned invitation to my first show with my mother's handwriting. The Yale Law acceptance letter. The sticky note from Leo that said, "You're working for the wrong artist." Pages of my father's old legal pads, his precise script fading into abstraction. Between the panels on the walls were enormous paintings, not of faces, but of empty chairs at tables, of closed doors, of the ghostly afterimage of a removed family portrait. And in the very center, on a simple plinth, was a single object under glass. The return to sender envelope from my Red Hook show, the one my mother sent back. It was a cathedral of silence, a monument to every unspoken word, every dismissed dream, every choice that goes unrecorded in the official family history. It was beautiful, and it was devastating. My parents walked into it. Julian followed, his lawyer's mask finally slipping into genuine, bewildered awe. For a full minute, no one spoke. The only sound was the whisper of the climate control. My father stopped in front of a large painting titled Prodigal. It showed an empty chair at a lavish dinner table, the place setting meticulously detailed, the chair itself blurred and fading. He stared at it for a long time. My mother drifted to the glass case. She saw her own handwriting. She saw the stamp. Her shoulders slumped. Julian found me near the entrance. "Alara, it's incredible." He sounded breathless. "It's also a nuclear bomb. You understand that, right? This isn't just art. This is an autopsy of us." "It's my truth," I said quietly. "They'll never recover from this," he said, not accusingly, but with a strange, newfound respect. "You didn't just become successful, you weaponized your journey." Alicia's assistant approached. "5 minutes to public doors, Ms. Vance." The spell broke. My father turned from the painting and walked toward me. His steps were slow, heavy. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't look at the art. He looked only at me. "All these years," he said, his voice scraped raw. "This is what you were doing, cataloging your grievances, building a case against us." "I was building a world, Dad, because mine collapsed. I'm not cataloging grievances. I'm documenting an absence, your absence." He flinched, a real physical recoil. My mother joined him, tears cutting clean lines through her makeup. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We didn't know it was like this." "You didn't ask," I said, the simplest, most lethal truth. The main doors at the far end of the wing began to open. The murmur of hundreds of voices swelled, flooding the space with the sound of the world arriving. Flashbulbs popped. The public unveiling had begun. Alicia took my arm. "It's time." She led me toward the podium, where the velvet drape hung over the wing's dedicatory plaque. My parents and Julian were shepherded to the front row of assembled guests, faces in a sea of strangers. I stood at the microphone. The lights were blinding. I could just make out my family's faces in the front row, my father stone-faced, my mother weeping quietly, Julian staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Good evening," I began, my voice echoing. 10 years ago, I made a choice that defined my life. I chose a path of uncertainty over a map. For a long time, that choice was seen by those closest to me as a failure, a rebellion, a disappointment. I paused, letting the word hang in the hushed, reverent air of the museum. This installation, the Silent Ledger, is not about that disappointment. It is about everything that grows in the silence left behind. It is about the architecture we build inside ourselves when the doors around us stay closed. I nodded to Alicia. Together we pulled the cord. The velvet drape fell away. The plaque was brushed stainless steel, deeply engraved. It read, "The ALISHA-CHEN Contemporary Wing. Inaugural Commission. The Silent Ledger by ELARA-VANCE. Generously established by the ELARA-VANCE Foundation." The crowd applauded, a polite, sophisticated sound, but my family wasn't looking at the plaque. They were looking at the line beneath the major text, smaller but unmistakable. A permanent public dedication. It read, for the quiet ones, "Build your own room." My father's head dropped. He stared at the floor. My mother reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. Julian just kept looking at me, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. The crowd surged forward, a tide of congratulations. I was swept away, curators, critics, collectors. I lost sight of my family for 20 minutes. When I finally extricated myself, I found Julian alone by a service door, scrolling violently through his phone. "They left," he said without looking up. "What?" "Mom and Dad, they called a car, they're gone." He finally met my eyes. His were bright with a furious, wounded intensity. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" His heart condition, Alara, the stress. He was white as a sheet, he couldn't breathe. A cold fist clenched in my stomach. "Is he?" "He's fine, he's just shattered." Julian shoved his phone in his pocket. "You won, okay, you proved your point to the entire world. You got your name on the wall of the Whitney. Was it worth it to break them?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say that after a decade of being broken by them, it was a fair exchange. But the look on Julian's face, it wasn't his usual arrogance. It was fear, real fear for our father. "I didn't do this to break them," I said, but it sounded weak, even to me. "Then why?" he demanded, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent. "Why this public spectacle? Why not just tell them, a phone call? Hey, I've made it, come see my show." "Because they wouldn't have come." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. A few heads turned. "They've never come, Julian. Not to Chicago, not to Red Hook, not to the Biennial. They needed to see it like this, in a place they couldn't dismiss, surrounded by people whose respect they understand. I needed them to see that my world is real." He studied me, and for the first time I saw something like pity. "You still need their approval. Even now, that's what this is. The biggest I told you so in art history, and you're still the girl on the stairs." His words were a direct hit. I had no defense. He sighed, the anger draining out of him, leaving exhaustion. "I'm going to their hotel. I have to make sure Dad's okay." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The work, it is incredible, Alara. It really is. But you wrapped a masterpiece around a landmine. I hope you know how to defuse it." He walked away, disappearing into the service corridor. I stood there, alone in the middle of my triumph, the champagne flute cold in my hand, the applause still ringing in my ears. The victory felt hollow, sharp-edged. Julian was right. I had wanted them to see my world. But I had also secretly wanted to hurt them, to make them feel a fraction of my loneliness, and I had succeeded. But as I looked around at the crowds marveling at my silent ledger, a terrible, quiet thought took root. What if, in building my own room, I had just permanently sealed the door to theirs? The party swirled around me for another hour. I gave interviews, smiled for photos, performed the role of the triumphant artist. Inside, I was numb. I checked my phone obsessively. No calls, no texts. It was close to midnight when Alicia found me. A stunning night, Alara, truly historic. She leaned in, her voice dropping. "I saw your family leave early. Is everything all right?" "It's complicated," I said. She gave a knowing, sympathetic smile. "It always is. The work that costs us the most rarely comes from a place of peace. Get some rest. We'll talk next week." My driver took me back to my apartment in Brooklyn. The city lights glittered, indifferent. My phone stayed dark. I replayed the night on a loop, my father's recoil, my mother's tears, Julian's accusation. I had just achieved the dream. My name was on the wall of the Whitney Museum, and all I felt was a vast, echoing emptiness. The very silence my installation was built to critique had followed me home. I poured a drink I didn't want and sat in the dark. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone finally lit up. A text, not from my parents. It was from Julian. "Dad's in the ER, Mount Sinai. It's not a heart attack. It's a severe panic attack, but they're keeping him overnight. He won't stop saying your name." I stood in my dark apartment, the phone's glow the only light, reading those words over and over. "He won't stop saying your name." In that moment, the triumphant artist vanished. I was just a daughter who might have broken her father. I called a car. I didn't change. I went to Mount Sinai in the same black dress from the gala, the smell of champagne and perfume still on my skin, a grotesque contrast to the sterile hospital hallway. Julian was waiting outside the room, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He looked exhausted. "He's sleeping now. They sedated him." What happened exactly? A full-blown dissociative panic attack. His blood pressure spiked. He thought he was dying. He kept saying, "I didn't see it, I didn't see her," over and over. Julian pushed off the wall, his voice low and furious. "Congratulations, your masterpiece was a trigger." I looked through the glass window of the room. My father looked small in the hospital bed, wires taped to his chest, an oxygen cannula under his nose. My mother was slumped in a chair beside him, holding his hand, asleep or just shut down. "I need to talk to him," I said. "No, you don't get to do that, not tonight. Your art had its moment. This is the consequence. Let them have some peace." "Julian, I never wanted." "What did you want, Alara?" he interrupted, his composure snapping. "Be specific. Did you want them to applaud? Did you want him to stand up in front of all those people and say, 'My daughter the genius, I was wrong'? What was the fantasy, because I guarantee this wasn't it?" I had no answer. The fantasy had been vague, a stunned silence, then awe, then a tearful embrace under the museum lights. A movie reconciliation. I hadn't accounted for the sheer, brutal force of a lifetime of judgment crashing down on a 70-year-old man's psyche. "I'm staying the night," Julian said, finality in his tone. "You should go home." I didn't go home. I sat in the bleak hospital cafeteria until sunrise, drinking terrible coffee, watching the night shift change. I was trapped between two irreconcilable truths. I had created something profound and lasting, and I had possibly broken the man who gave me life. At 7 a.m., my mother found me. She looked 100 years old. She sat down across from me, her movements slow. "He's awake," she said. "He's asking for you." My heart hammered. Is he angry? "He's quiet." She folded her hands on the table, staring at the Formica. "When we got the invitation, after his health scare, he was trying, Alara. In his way, he bought a book, Understanding Modern Art. It was on his nightstand. He'd been trying to read it." I felt the world tilt. What? He couldn't get past the introduction. He said it was like reading a foreign language. It frustrated him. He's a man who understands contracts, precedents. This world of yours, it terrified him because he couldn't master it, and he only knows how to engage with things he can master. A nurse came over. "Mrs. Vance, he's ready." I followed my mother back to the room. My father was propped up, pale but alert. Julian stood in the corner, a silent sentinel. The room was unbearably quiet. My father looked at me. His eyes were clear but deeply weary. "Alara." "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." He held up a hand, not to dismiss me but to stop the flow. "Don't, no apologies, not from you." He took a slow, measured breath. "I have spent 30 years building a practice, a reputation, on being able to assess evidence and render a judgment. Last night, I was presented with overwhelming evidence that my most important judgment was catastrophically wrong." He paused, gathering strength. I looked at that ledger. I saw the proof, the returned letters, the ignored invitations, the empty chair. I am a man who respects evidence, and the evidence convicted me. A single tear tracked down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I am so sorry, Alara, I failed you." I started to cry. Silent, shaking tears. A decade of armor dissolving in that sterile room. "The doctor says this," he gestured weakly to the IV, "was a somatic reaction. My body rejecting a lie I'd told myself for 10 years, that you were just being difficult, that you'd come to your senses. The lie is gone, there's just the truth, and it's heavy." My mother began to sob quietly. Julian looked at the floor. "I don't know how to fix this," my father said, his voice breaking. "I don't know the rules for this." "There are no rules, Dad," I whispered. He nodded, accepting that like another verdict. "The work, it's powerful, it's painful, but it's powerful. Julian says it's a masterpiece. I don't know what that means, but I believe him." It wasn't the understanding I'd craved. It was something more honest, a surrender, an admission of defeat not by me but by the truth itself. It was enough. In that moment, it was everything. He was discharged the next afternoon. They went back to Westchester. I went back to my silent, triumphant apartment. The reviews for the Silent Ledger came out. They were rapturous. The New York Times called it a seismic addition to the contemporary canon. My prices quadrupled overnight. My voicemail filled with requests. It was everything I'd worked for. and it felt like ash. I didn't hear from them for a week. Then a package arrived at my studio. No note. Inside was my father's copy of Understanding Modern Art. A bookmark was placed about a third of the way through. I opened it. The margins were filled with his tight, precise script, not notes on art theory, questions. What is she trying to say here? Is this color choice deliberate? How does this relate to the ledger concept? He wasn't reading to understand art. He was reading to understand me. Beneath the book was a small, worn legal pad. I recognized it instantly, the same brand he'd used for decades. On the top sheet, he had written a single sentence, the words labored, as if each one cost him something. I am beginning the work of seeing you. It is the most important case of my life. I sat on my studio floor and wept. This is where the story should end, right? The reconciliation, the tearful understanding, the father studying the daughter's world. But life isn't a single act of contrition. It's a series of choices. And a week later, Julian came to see me, and he brought a box that changed everything all over again. He looked grim. He placed a cardboard file box on my work table. I found this in Dad's study. He doesn't know I have it. I think you need to see it. I lifted the lid. Inside were not legal files, but magazines, Art Forum, Art in America, Brooklyn Rail, stretching back 10 years. I picked one up from 2014. A small, yellow post-it note was stuck to the cover near the spine, my father's handwriting, an arrow pointing to a line in the table of contents. I followed it. Page 47. A one-paragraph review of a group show at a tiny gallery in Chicago. The third artist mentioned, Ilara Vance shows promise with her textured explorations of absence. My breath caught. I flipped through another, a review of the Red Hook show, The Unseen Hours. His note, location, Red Hook, critic, positive. Another from the Whitney Biennial Catalog. His note, her piece, room 4A plan visit. But the visit never happened. He's been tracking me. For years, Julian said quietly. He had a subscription to every major art journal. He hired a clipping service for your name. He knew about every show, every review. He even knew about the bad one from the Chicago Reader. The room spun, but he never said anything. He acted like it didn't exist. I know, Julian's face was tight with a confused anguish. I confronted him about it last night, after I found the box. I asked him why, if he knew all this, why the silence, why the disappointment routine. What did he say? Julian looked at me, and his eyes were full of a pity so deep it felt like a wound. He said he was scared. Scared of what? That you would succeed without him. The words hung in the dusty studio air. They didn't make sense. Then they made a terrible, perfect sense. Julian continued, his voice flat. His whole identity was being the provider, the mapmaker, the one with the answers. You chose a path he couldn't navigate. If you failed, he could rescue you. That was a role he understood. If you succeeded, you wouldn't need him. You'd be beyond him. His pride couldn't handle the first. His fear couldn't handle the second. So he chose silence. A permanent, punishing silence. It was easier than admitting he was obsolete. It was the most devastating revelation of all. It wasn't disdain. It was terror. My father, the immovable rock, had been terrified of my freedom, of my potential success. The disappointment was a shield for him. There's more, Julian said. He reached into the box and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio. He opened it. Inside were not clippings but financial printouts, spreadsheets. He didn't just track your reviews. He tracked the market, your sales. He has a record of every painting you've ever sold, the price, the buyer. He has an estimated net worth of your career here from year one. I stared at the columns of numbers. He knew the price of my first painting at the new museum. He knew the grant amounts. He had charts. Why? I whispered, feeling violated. I asked him that too, Julian said. He said I needed to know if she was safe. Julian slammed the portfolio shut. He's a tax attorney, Ilara. Assessing security is his love language. He couldn't ask you about your feelings, so he stalked your balance sheet. To him, this was caring. I thought I'd reached the bottom of the family well. I was wrong. This was a new cavern, darker and more twisted. His apology in the hospital was real, but it was only the surface. Beneath it was a decade of secret, fractured, utterly misguided vigilance. What do I do with this? I asked, numb. I don't know, Julian said. But I'm telling you because the narrative is wrong. You thought you were fighting indifference. You were fighting a warped, terrified form of love, which is somehow harder to forgive. He left me with the box. I spent the night going through it. Every clipped review, every financial notation was a brick in a secret wall he'd built between us. A wall of data because emotion was too dangerous. I needed to talk to him, not about art, not about the past, about that box. But before I could, the universe, in its cruel irony, intervened again. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice was eerily calm. "Ilara, your father, he's had a stroke." The world narrowed to a single point. The hospital again. The same sterile smell, the same fluorescent lights, but this time, it wasn't a panic attack. It was a cerebrovascular event. A blood clot. The ultimate physical manifestation of a blockage we'd lived with for a decade. I drove to Westchester in a blur. Julian's words echoed. He was scared you succeed without him. Now, lying in a neurological ICU, he might never have the chance to be part of that success at all. The doctor was blunt. A moderate ischemic stroke, left hemisphere. It would affect his speech, his right side mobility. The extent of the damage was unclear. "The next 72 hours are critical," she said, "for recovery and for assessing permanent deficits." My mother was a statue of grief. Julian handled the paperwork, the questions, his finance brain a useful shield. I just stood there, useless. The artist who built monuments to silence, rendered silent herself by the beep of a heart monitor. We took shifts. That first night it was me. He was asleep, breathing through a tube, his face slack. I pulled a chair close. I didn't hold his hand. We weren't there yet, but I talked. I told him about the box, about finding his notes. "I saw the clippings, Dad. I saw the spreadsheets. I know you were watching." My voice was a whisper in the dark room. Julian told me why. I understand being scared. I've been scared my whole life. A tear leaked from the corner of his closed eye. He could hear me. "You don't have to be scared anymore," I said. "And you don't have to understand it. You just have to be here. That's all I ever wanted. For you to be in the room." The next morning the tube came out. He was awake. His right arm lay heavy at his side. He tried to speak. The words were there in his eyes, fierce and frustrated, but his mouth couldn't shape them. It came out as a slurry, a groan. "LRA-SSS." "It's okay," I said, my own voice thick. "Don't try." He shook his head, a violent, jerky motion. "No, not okay." He pointed a trembling left finger at me, then at his own chest, then back at me. "You, me." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, taking in the room, the world, everything. A speech therapist came, a physical therapist. The slow, brutal work of rebuilding neural pathways began. He raged against it. He was a man of precise language, and it had been stolen from him. He threw a water cup across the room. He wept with sheer frustration. I started bringing things, not flowers, art supplies, a large sketchpad, a set of charcoal pencils. I placed them on his bedside table without comment. 2 days later, I walked in to find him propped up, the sketchpad on his lap, the charcoal clutched awkwardly in his left hand. He was drawing, not well. The lines were shaky, childlike. He was trying to draw the vase of flowers on the windowsill. He saw me and tried to hide it, shame flashing across his face. I sat down. "Can I see?" Reluctantly, he turned the pad. It was a mess, but it was an attempt. "It's good," I said. "The shadow here, you got the perspective of the window." He grunted, unconvinced. Then he pointed to the charcoal in my hand. "You want me to draw?" He nodded. So I did. I drew the same vase. My lines were sure practiced. I rendered the light, the texture of the petals, the reflection in the glass. In 5 minutes, I'd created a perfect, lifelike sketch. I showed him. He looked from his drawing to mine, back and forth. Then he did something remarkable. He laughed, a rough, wet sound. He pointed at his, then at mine, and made a sweeping, dismissive gesture. "Mine is terrible." Then he pointed at mine and gave a thumbs up. "Yours is brilliant." It was the first honest, unfiltered communication we'd had in maybe 20 years. No subtext, no judgment, just a pure acknowledgement of difference, of skill. He wasn't threatened by my talent in that moment. He was admiring it. The stroke had stripped away his ability to posture, to defend. All that was left was the truth. He took the pad back. On a clean sheet, he wrote, his left hand scrawling giant, looping letters, HOW. "How do I do it?" I asked. He nodded. So I tried to explain. I talked about line, about light, about seeing not the object but the spaces around it. I talked about the silence between the notes. He listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't trying to master it. He was trying to witness it. A week later, he was moved to a rehab facility. The family therapy sessions, once theoretical, began in earnest there, with his speech therapist often mediating. It was awkward, painful, halting. My mother confessed her guilt for being the peacekeeper who kept no peace. Julian admitted his resentment at being the good son who felt invisible in a different way. And my father, through a combination of single words, gestures, and that left-handed scrawl, began to testify. One session, the therapist asked him what the silent ledger felt like to him. He thought for a long time, then he picked up his pen. He wrote one word, MIRROR. He looked at me, tapped the word, then pointed at his own chest. It showed you yourself, the therapist said. He nodded, then he pointed at me and made a heart with his hands. It was clumsy, sweet. It showed me you. The dam was broken, not with a flood of eloquent apology, but with a slow, persistent drip of effort. He worked his speech exercises with the same dogged determination he'd used to build his law practice. His first clear sentence, 2 weeks in, was, "I like your colors." He was talking about a postcard of my work I'd left on his tray. Progress wasn't linear. There were days of despair, of rage, but the box of clippings was now out in the open. We looked at it together sometimes. He'd point to a review and say, "Proud." The word was hard for him to form. Proudy, but he said it. 3 months after the stroke, he was coming home. He could walk with a cane. His speech was about 70%. He tired easily. The arrogant, certain man was gone. In his place was someone quieter, more deliberate, more present. The week he came home, I got a call from Alicia Chen. "The Silent Ledger installation. We've had record numbers. The board wants to make it a permanent part of the Wings collection, but they're concerned." About what? About the narrative. It's a powerful piece about family rupture. If it becomes permanent, that story is frozen. The museum doesn't want to enshrine a tragedy if the story has changed. Has it? I looked around my father's study, now with a walker in the corner, the sketchpad always on his desk. "It's changing," I said. "It's not a tragedy anymore, it's a document." "Then perhaps," Alicia said gently, "the document needs an addendum." I knew what she meant. I hung up and I called a family meeting. In my parents' living room with my father in his special chair, I laid it out. The Whitney wanted to buy the installation forever, but they wanted our story, the whole story, including the aftermath, to be part of it. They proposed a small, adjacent space, a video interview, a display of the evidence box, my father hospital sketches, his notes, the story of the stroke and the reconciliation. "They want to turn our family therapy into public art," Julian said, incredulous. "They want to show that silence isn't the end of the story," I said, "that things can be rebuilt, even if they're different." My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said slowly, carefully, "The ledger is not balanced." We waited. More pages needed. He agreed. The recording session at the Whitney was one of the hardest things we've ever done. Sitting under those same lights, not as triumphant artist and shamed family, but as 4 wounded people trying to explain how a crack in the universe can sometimes let in light. My father struggled with his words, but his emotion was clear. My mother cried. Julian was stoic, honest. I just tried to hold the space. The addendum room opened quietly 6 months after the main installation. It's called The Conversation. It's much smaller. It holds the box of clippings. It plays our interview on a loop. And on the central wall in a frame is my father's first successful drawing after his stroke. Not of a vase, it's a drawing of my hand holding a charcoal pencil. Underneath, in his now careful left-handed script, it says, "My daughter's hand, it builds worlds. I am learning to see them." He comes to the museum now sometimes. He walks slowly through the wing with his cane. He doesn't always understand the other art, but he stands in front of that drawing and he nods. He's a part of it. His mark is on the wall, too. Julian and I have lunch once a month. We're not close, but we're no longer adversaries. We're allies in the complicated business of caring for our parents and for each other. My mother volunteers at the museum's front desk 2 days a week. She tells everyone who will listen, "My daughter is the artist." The pride in her voice is no longer performative, it's quiet, deep, and earned. And me, I still work. The work is different now. It's less about absence, more about connection, about the fragile, visible threads that try to bridge a gap. It sells. The Vance name now means something in the art world, but the victory is no longer in the sale or the review, it's in the Sunday dinners. Every other Sunday, I drive to Westchester. My father cooks slowly, one-handed. It's usually pasta, something hard to mess up. We eat at the same dining room table where this all began. The conversation is simple, the weather, the news. Sometimes we talk about art. He'll ask a question. Why is that painting just a blue square? And I'll try to explain. He'll listen, nod, and usually say, I don't get it, but I like that you do. That's the final surprise, the one I never saw coming. I didn't need him to understand my world. I just needed him to respect its existence. And in losing his own facility with words, he finally learned to speak a language I could hear, the language of effort, the language of showing up. The Whitney Wing is still named for Alicia Chen. My installation is still called the Silent Ledger. But if you walk through it now, and into the small room at the end, you'll see the story didn't end with the silence. It began there. The ledger was never meant to be a record of debt. It was an invitation to a conversation we were all too scared to start. My name is Alara Vance. I am 34 years old. I am an artist with work in the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum, and I am, finally, imperfectly, my father's daughter. So what's the lesson in a story like this? That you should pursue your passion to spite your parents and wait for a museum to vindicate you? No, that's the fairy tale. The real lesson is messier and so much more human. It's that the people who love us are often the most terrified by our dreams, because our dreams live outside their jurisdiction. Their fear can look like cruelty. Their silence can feel like annihilation. And sometimes, the only way to make them see is to build something so undeniable, so physically present, that their old story can no longer contain it. But here's the crucial part, the part I almost missed. Building that undeniable thing cannot be asterisk for asterisk them. It has to be for you. The moment I made the Whitney unveiling about their reaction, I handed them the scalpel again. My victory only became real when I stopped needing them to validate it. My father didn't come to understand contemporary art. He came to understand me. And he did it not in the grand museum, but in the quiet, humiliating struggle of a hospital room where all his defenses were gone. Our reconciliation wasn't built on shared taste. It was built on shared vulnerability, on the mutual, staggering effort it takes to translate a lifetime of silence into a new, fragile language. If you take anything from this, let it be this: build your room. Build it brick by brick in the face of every doubt, especially your own. Make it sturdy, make it beautiful, make it yours. And then leave a door. Not a grand, welcoming archway you stand guard over, but a simple, honest door. You don't have to hold it open. You don't have to beg anyone to walk through. But leave it there, unlocked, for the day they finally find the courage to approach it on their own. Because the goal isn't to live without them. The goal is to live so fully that you can afford to let them back in, on your terms, when they're finally ready to see you. Maybe your silent ledger isn't about art. Maybe it's about a career path, a relationship, an identity, a truth you've been asked to hide. The architecture is the same. Build your room. Your people will either learn the new address or they won't. And you will have built a life too magnificent to mourn the ones who chose to stay outside. If this story resonated with you, if you saw a piece of your own family in mine, tell me in the comments. What's one page in your silent ledger? And if you're building your own room right now, against all odds, just type building. Let's see how many of us are out here, constructing our own monuments. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want more journeys like this, raw, real stories of overcoming the odds and redefining family, make sure to subscribe. Your support means more artists, more writers, more quiet dreamers get to share their truth. I'm Alara Vance. Until next time, keep building.